Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar about our landscape contribution claims and the pilot that will be launching soon. My name's Sophie Percy. I'm the Senior Program Manager for LandScale. I'm joined today by my colleagues Arturo Tovar, our Business Development Manager, Marie Fallet, our Technical Manager, and Rachel Gartner, our Communications Manager. We're going to be walking you through some of the latest thinking and developments in the landscape contribution claim space. And then we'll be talking you through the details of the LandScale contribution claims mechanism, which we are planning to pilot in the next few months. So we'll get started. I'm imagining that most of you here today are already familiar with LandScale, but just in case you aren't, LandScale is a collaborative initiative which is co-led by Rainforest Alliance and Conservation International, and it was developed in collaboration with a number of partners from around the world who were involved in the field testing of the LandScale system and other aspects of the design of LandScale. And we're continuing to grow our partners. There's a few here we haven't pictured yet on the screen. New partners such as CDP, the Landscape Finance Lab, and 1000 Landscapes have joined us in the last year. So that's been super exciting. And we are a donor-funded initiative. Moving on. So the mission we have is to drive improvements in sustainability at the landscape scale. And the role that LandScale plays in this is to help users who are working with landscape level goals to generate trusted information that can be used both at the local level and by global stakeholders to both align and incentivize action to deliver improvements at that bigger scale. Moving on. So we're seeing an increasing level of engagement from both companies and regional governments in multi-stakeholder landscape approaches, both landscape approaches and jurisdictional approaches. And we see this as a sign that this is increasingly recognized as a really helpful way to tackle the urgent systemic challenges we face and deliver more resilient supply chains. So here on the screen, you can see the data from the CDP questionnaires, which first included questions about engagement in landscape and jurisdictional approaches in 2020. And you can see a significant increase in engagement from both companies and states and regions in terms of reporting engagement in these landscape initiatives, which I think is a really clear signal that this is increasingly recognized as being a really important strategy. Moving on, another example of the importance of landscape approaches is that in the first release of the Science-Based Targets for Nature, which happened earlier this year, landscape engagement, so engagement beyond supply chains, was also recognized as one of the 3 priority areas of action needed for businesses with impacts on nature to align their practices with what nature needs. So you can see here that there's 3 targets under the land systems aspect of the SBTN, one around no conversion of natural ecosystems and reducing the footprint, the land footprint of supply chains, but then also going beyond those supply chains to deliver restoration and improvements in other ecosystems and social conditions at that landscape level. So just to show what that means in a little bit more detail, moving on to the next slide. So this landscape engagement target from the Science-Based Target for Nature requires companies to engage in landscape approaches. You can see the details there on the screen. And these companies are required to identify material landscapes and then identify whether or not there's an existing landscape initiative there, or they need to work with others to start a new initiative. And there's some criteria that have been developed by a number of organizations, including CDP, ProForest and others, around what constitutes a kind of credible, mature landscape initiative that's likely to deliver impact. And these criteria relate to the scale of the initiative, the extent to which there's multi-stakeholder engagement, whether or not landscape level goals have been identified by those stakeholders and a collective action plan to achieve those goals, and the fact that there's a transparent reporting system in place. And as LandScale, we're obviously very pleased to see that there is a focus on a baseline assessment being conducted to establish the status of ecological and social conditions within those landscapes where these initiatives are being implemented before a company invests and engage in actions there, and that these companies commit to as making a substantial contribution to improving those ecological and social conditions in relation to the baseline. And obviously, in order to achieve that, there needs to be a clear action plan showing which types of actions different stakeholders are going to take responsibility for. So in parallel to this increasing engagement in landscape approaches by both companies and regional governments, and there has also been increasing interest from companies and other actors in making both collective and individual claims about the contribution that they are making to improving sustainability at landscape scale. LandScale has been very actively involved in these discussions with ICEAL, and ICEAL have been doing an amazing job to try and align all the different organizations who are working in this space and to really define best practice so that it becomes clearer to those wanting to engage and make claims what they should be doing. Moving on. So here you can see on the screen one of the earlier pieces of work by ICEAL, which really lays out the 4 principles for how companies can best contribute to improving sustainability performance at landscape scale. So here you can see that the focus is on identifying the landscapes which companies can engage in and the key issues in those landscapes, defining the actions and how they relate to actions being taken by other stakeholders within the landscape. Again, that there's a collective monitoring framework in place, and that the implementation of our actions to deliver on those improvements are being monitored as well, and that there's accurate data to underpin the communication of results in order to make claims. Moving on. This work has evolved over the last year or so, and this is taken from one of the more recent position papers developed by ICEAL, but I think it's really helpful before we dive into the LandScale claims mechanism to highlight what are considered by this group of thought leaders in this space to be the characteristics of a credible contribution by a company or other actor to improving sustainability at landscape level. So on the left, you see the 2 kind of really key requirements for this, and that is that the actions that are the focus of the contribution by a company, the investment or the action, contributes to goals that are defined by local multi-stakeholder input, and that there is this link between the action and how it will contribute to improving things at landscape level. In the LandScale claims mechanism, we call this the results chain, and Arturo is going to go into that in more detail in a second, and also that there's a clear way to monitor that change. And obviously, it's really important that this is different to a supply chain intervention or a project. We really are trying to drive change at a bigger scale. There's also a few additional criteria that have been agreed upon by this group. So it's important that stakeholders within the landscape contribute to the multi-stakeholder coordination. It's sometimes not the most exciting, it can be slow, but it is really critical to the success of these initiatives. It's also important that the actions are aligned and part of a bigger action plan, and that they contribute to improving landscape level goals. And just before I pass over to Arturo, I wanted to emphasize that we really are here talking about contribution claims rather than attribution claims. As you, I'm sure, all know, landscapes are complicated systems. There's lots of different organizations and actors undertaking different interventions, both positive and negative, which are contributing to change at that landscape level. And there's also other external factors that are beyond the control of individual actors, such as weather cycles or technological improvements. So when we're talking about claims, we really are talking about contribution claims rather than attribution claims, because there is that idea of shared causality for improvements that are measured at the landscape scale. Although attribution claims are often very desirable, it's often very difficult in these complex systems to really prove that an improvement in a specific indicator, such as water quality, was solely caused by an individual actor or action. So yeah, I'm going to pass over now to Arturo, who's going to launch a poll. And perhaps before I do so, just one bit of housekeeping. We will be leaving plenty of time at the end of today for questions and answers. So please do use the Q&A function in Zoom to add your questions as we go along, and then we'll make sure to leave plenty of time to answer those questions at the end. Over to you, Arturo.
Thank you, Sophie. So I'm launching the poll now. I'm going to give a couple of minutes for people to be able to answer, and then we will carry on. Seems to be interest in making claims. 64% of the participants so far have said that they are interested. 14% no, not at the moment, maybe, and 21% maybe. There's a higher interest in making specific action claims, like we are implementing these specific activities. On a second place, contribution to outcome claims, like this activity has contributed to a specific outcome. So this is quite interesting to get kind of a feeling of what the participants are interested in. Maybe I will continue. I will carry on with the presentation. Thank you for answering the poll. I'm going to share the results here for you to be able to see. Thank you, Rachel. So yeah, just as Sophie was mentioning, based on the uptake that the landscape approach is getting by more and more organizations, there are three actions that we as the LandScale team are undertaking to help organizations validate and communicate landscape scale claims, which has become a need. So to do this, we have developed a practical guidance about the information needed. So it can be credible, demonstrated the contribution of an action to improve sustainability at the landscape scale. This is something that we are piloting, of course. We are piloting this service at the moment to validate this information. So yeah, I mean, we are still looking at the market to see if this is something that has a demand and that it is bringing an added value, which is the point of it. And we are enabling organizations to showcase their contribution on relevant landscape profile in the LandScale platform as well. So the idea is to validate and then enable communication of these claims. Thank you. So first of all, what is the criteria for validation that will bring credibility to a claim? And this has to do with what Sophie mentioned before. So basically, there are three criteria for this at a high level. So is that an activity is co-designed with local landscape stakeholders, so it follows the rules of a landscape approach involving the relevant stakeholders in a landscape. It can make or has made a meaningful contribution to improving key sustainability outcomes at the landscape scale. So it has to be looking at that level, not only at farm level or project level. It has to be looking at issues that will be relevant for the landscape scale. And the third one is that it is unlikely to have detrimental effects on landscape stakeholders or sustainability outcomes. So that's the idea of, I will come to it later, but that's the idea of looking at the whole picture, looking at it in a holistic way to make sure that an action is not being positive in some part of the landscape, but in maybe in another one or in another indicator, it's been detrimental. So that's the whole logic behind. And then the second element is the publication, as I mentioned before. So the publication in our platform will bring visibility for relevant actors and maybe potential landscape partners and supporters. So the idea is that it is easier for an initiative to get some traction and to get some communication to different potential investors or local other local NGOs or local governments who also want to participate or support the initiatives that are being done. Uh, Next slide, please. So this is a four-step process that we have for the claims mechanism, which I will go through step by step. Many of you are already familiar with LandScale and with the baseline assessment that LandScale brings, but I will go through it briefly anyway for the benefit of the ones who are not that familiar. So the first step is actually to have a LandScale baseline assessment in place. This will help establish a reliable parting point after an initiative has identified risks and opportunities for the landscape. Uh, I will go through this framework and a little bit more in detail in the next slides anyway. The second step is to define activities that support landscape outcomes. Third step is to proceed with the implementation of activities and monitor progress annually. And finally, demonstrate impact by conducting a land-scale reassessment of what has happened with the activities. After this, the idea is that this is a loop. So it goes back after doing a reassessment to defining the goals to make sure that they are still relevant, or if they have to be switched to maybe make emphasis on some other kind of indicators or actions. Yeah, and this has to be reassessed every now and then, right? Just talking about the elements, the different kinds of claim, and I'm going to go back to this in detail anyway, but we have two different kinds of claims. So the first one we call investment claim. So the idea is that this is done once an activity is identified, but it will still start, or it's still in the beginning. So this is an example of one of an investment claim. So for example, the Biodiverse Landscapes Fund has committed to restore 10,000 hectares of forest along the Zambezi River between 2023 and 2026, which will contribute to protecting biodiversity and reducing soil erosion and water pollution. So this is something that is done ex ante. Once an activity is already identified, of course, there has to be a plan, there has to be resources, there has to be identified stakeholders. This is something that is planning to be done. So this is on the first part. Then on the last part, once you are able to demonstrate the impact, we call it an impact claim. One example of this is this one we have on screen. So since 2012, Yellow Fruit Banana Company has funded the operation of two schools for the local community. This has contributed to the 20% increase in the number of school-aged children attending school in the district between 2012 and 2023, as well as 10% reduction in the number of school-aged children that are malnourished. So the idea is to look at it in the end as a landscape. That's what Sophie was mentioning before of contribution claims. I mean, we have to make sure that the activity is relevant towards the landscape level outcome. And this is done by conducting a reassessment to make sure that the indicator that is being measured is actually moving in a positive way. And just going deeper into each one of the elements. So I was talking about conducting a baseline assessment at first. So it is important to mention this. So a landscape assessment has three elements. The first one of them is that we have an assessment framework with the most relevant indicators and metrics that should be looked after in a landscape. Then the second element is the validation mechanism that we have. I will go briefly through this one to bring credibility to the results and to the final report. And then we have the online platform, of course. I mean, where everything is conducted. The assessment teams get the validation there, and then they get to do all of the work in there, to input all the data in there, and then they get to publish the report and the results in the platform itself. Uh, Next slide, please. So this is the process. I'm going to go briefly through it. So this is the workflow that is currently in our platform. And the way it works is by following these 5 steps. After each step, there is a validation by the LandScale team, just to make sure that the guidelines are being followed. So in the end, the result will be more robust and credible and reliable. So step number 1 is about recruiting an assessment team and setting the landscape goals. Step number 2 is about identifying the landscape boundary. We usually recommend that is by watershed or by jurisdiction, but it can be also a custom boundary. Step number 3 and 4 are where most of the work takes place. So step number 3 is about selecting the indicators and metrics that will be relevant and that will be assessed for this landscape assessment. And step number 4 is about actually identifying the data, getting the data sources, and inputting all of the data into the platform. This is the step that takes the most time, and this is the place where we have a second validation mechanism. So on top of the LandScale review by the LandScale team, we require that there is a local expert involved as well. Um, so he or she can also validate the results, and basically he has to answer if the results actually reflect the conditions in the landscape, and if the data is suitable. Once the local reviewer has approved, the report can be then published, and the results can be shown in the platform. So just next slide, please. This is our framework. So this is the element that I was talking about. And the idea here is that we have a really holistic picture of the landscape to be able to identify the risks and opportunities at this scale. As you can see, we have several you have 4 pillars, and then we have 9 goals under those, and then under those we have different indicators, and then there is metrics under each indicator. This is the high level picture. So we have ecosystems, we have human well-being, we have governance, and we have production. And then the idea is that you can also, I mean, it's relevant to say that this is also flexible. So you can include, an organization can include indicators that are not here but are relevant for the landscape. We recommend that it's as broad as possible. It doesn't have to be like completely assessed. You don't have to include the whole set of indicators. You can only include the relevant ones or the ones where data can be acquired. But we recommend that it's done as holistic as possible to be able to identify the most relevant risks and opportunities at the landscape level, and then to be able to measure if there is nothing happening like in a detrimental way. If you're working in education and maybe you are like affecting some other indicator in a negative way, for example. So the idea is that's the general picture of having this kind of assessment. And then on the next slide, please. This is the second element. So once you have a baseline assessment, and it's important to have a baseline assessment, and I will tell you a little bit later where you can check if there is a baseline assessment for a landscape where you are participating. But once you have the baseline assessments, and you have identified what are the risks and the opportunities, and where is the goals and the relevant activities that should be done, then you can identify, you can relate the activities that you will be conducting to each pillar. So here, for example, I'm going to give just a brief example of each pillar. So on ecosystems, if you are conducting, I mean, for example, you are training or capacity building on protection and monitoring of natural ecosystems and species, that's an activity that could go under ecosystems. And the idea is that you could make a claim on this. Then under human well-being, one example is scholarships to enable access to education, for example. If this is something that is addressing an actual issue at the landscape level. For governance, for instance, you could claim on anti-corruption training for government officials, for example. And on production, it could be something like training, provision of inputs, or other support of producers, producer groups, and primary processors to improve agricultural or forestry practices and technologies. So, of course, these are just brief examples. It can be way more comprehensive, and it will depend, as long as it's identified that it's actually that the activity is actually hitting on one of the relevant identified indicators. It can be done. And then, so this is the defining. So on the next slide, please. So this is on the demonstrating on how activities can contribute to the outcomes. So this is the process that we will follow and that the LandScale team will be reviewing and assessing. So the first step, I will go through this because this is quite complex, but the first step is the inputs. So what we mean by inputs is the description of the resources that are being deployed to implement the activity. So this is the expected timing. This is the assumptions and enabling conditions. This is indicators for monitoring progress. What entities are responsible for implementation and monitoring. So all of this has to be really clear in the work plan. So the LandScale team can actually assess the result chain logic. And then on the output is the tangible products or direct results of the activity. So these should be quantified where possible. Then we have activity level outcomes, which also, I mean, when possible, there should be quantified. And then we jump to the LandScale level outcomes, which should come from a reassessment, running a complete LandScale reassessment. Uh, just to bring a quick example from this to kind of digest it a little bit better. And I'm going to go to one of the previous examples that I mentioned. For example, an input could be uh, okay, the idea is to uh, tackle an issue on the education pillar. So the inputs are to build the building material and equip two schools capable of educating 400 children between the age of 11 and 16. So you have a really well-defined target and a really well-defined process. So it's $50,000 per year to cover salaries of 10 teachers and other operating costs, including schools, lunches, building maintenance, etc. So these are the inputs. They have to be super clear on what you want to achieve and what you are like inputting. Then the outputs, the activity level outputs, the example of this will be, okay, two schools were built and equipped and 10 teachers were trained and hired. So this is the output at the activity level. And then the outcome is what was the impact of this. So under this example, it could be 400 children aged between 10 and 16 who were not previously attending secondary school are now able to receive a high quality full-time education. And then at the LandScale level outcomes, it's more broad. So it will be coming from a LandScale assessment. So it will be, for example, the percentage of school-age girls and boys that are attending schools that are not attending school decreased from 20 to 10%. Or maybe, for example, the percentage of population living below the poverty line decreased by 5%. So these are outcomes at the landscape level. So this is a brief example of how it works like. Can you go to the next slide, please? Um, so on this one, I mean, this is something that I already touched on previously on the two kinds of impact. So I won't go deeply into this, but just to kind of processes and make it easier to digest. So investment claims, just repeating, they are claims that focus on actions or investments that are taken to drive improvements in sustainability at landscape scale. So the main point of this is that these are made before landscape scale level sustainability results are achieved. So these are just actions, claims on actions that will be about to start or that are happening. And then the impact claims are for actions that have already happened and where the impacts can be measured and they can be documented. And they have been validated by a LandScale reassessment. So these are the two kinds of impact of claims: investment claims and impact claims. Then on the who is eligible for the pilot, so our pilot is suitable for any organization supporting specific interventions within a landscape. The key factor here is that the landscape has completed or will soon complete a LandScale assessment. You can actually visit our platform and look at the platform at the Landscape Explorer to find out if the landscape you are supporting is eligible. Here is the link to the platform, and this is just a print screen of the map. You can go in detail to see where all of these landscapes are. And if you are participating in any of these, you are eligible for making a claim. Then how do you apply? I mean, for applying, we have you can visit our website where you will have all of the detail, and you have a form that must be filled. The deadline is on the 29th of September, so you still have over a week now. Here is the link to our website and to the specific contribution claims pilot. And we will be selecting 10 eligible applicants to participate in the platform. So yeah, please don't wait and register. And now I think it's time for the Q&A. Yeah, here are some relevant websites that yeah, so you can follow us on LinkedIn for our latest updates, and on Twitter, or just send us an email.
So we have one question in the chat, which I think Marie is going to answer for us. So how much will you look at the aspect of sustainability of a piece of work after an investment? On your investment claim example, the investment period was over 3 years, but if a project has no funds afterwards or poor structuring for a continuity, the investment could be irrelevant ultimately. So how do you manage this aspect?
Thank you. That's an important question, because that's an important part of the requirements that we will look at when approving and validating the claims. Our requirement says that the claimant must monitor and report progress in the different areas. So it's not just that you will be allowed to make a claim, there will be a need to report progress on the following points: on the implementation of the activity, on the delivering of the outputs and outcomes that have been anticipated, and on achieving the desired improvement in sustainability at landscape level. So in case the monitoring shows that there is progress, everything's fine. In case the monitoring shows that there is a lack of progress, then the documentation must be provided to show what are your plans for adjusting the activities or the results chain so that the desired results are achieved. Because we all know that in the life of activities and projects, sometimes it can happen that things don't go as planned, and due to potentially external factors. So there is this possibility of readjusting. And on the duration, the claim of having contributing to improving sustainability at landscape level between the baseline and the repeated assessment will remain valid for 5 years following the repeat assessment, if there are 3 conditions. Condition number 1 is that the activities that are the subject of the claim have been fully implemented. Condition number 2 is that the outputs stated in the results chain have been delivered. And condition number 3 is that the focal indicators demonstrate improvement from the baseline value or condition. And of course, if landscape investment claims no longer meet these requirements that we have in the policy, they will be removed from the platform and can no longer be used in any ways. Does that answer? I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to ask a follow-up questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Marie. We have another question. So when a company chooses to invest in a landscape activity, can it be predicted by when it will be able to make an impact claim? Maybe Sophie, you can help us with this one.
Yeah, for sure, Arturo. So often landscape initiative will have targets, so quantitative targets for improving specific indicators. And so that is one piece of information that can be taken into account when looking at the change that needs to be realized. So it is often difficult to determine exactly the pace of change in that landscape. And that's why we recommend that regular assessments are conducted to get an up-to-date view of the status of sustainability in the landscape. So it is very hard to predict exactly when improvements will have been realized, but we require that that improvement is measured in order to make impact claim. So annual monitoring is required in terms of the implementation of the activity, which is the focus of the claim. And then every few years, the baseline assessment should be repeated to see the change at landscape level. And Marie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Just that we also anticipate the case where someone will have a validated investment claim and will want to shift that to an impact claim, and that's also possible. In that case, there is no need to start an impact claim from scratch. There is a way to just shift from investment claim to impact claim with a shorter process, focusing on a smaller set of requirements.
Thank you, Sophia and Marie. So we have another question. To what extent does the platform show activities within a landscape initiative? Maybe Sophie?
Of course. So on the platform, every initiative that has conducted an assessment has a landscape profile, which you can see in the Landscape Explorer, which Rachel has posted a link to in the chat. And within that profile, there's the opportunity to upload an action plan. So that's one way of showcasing the activities that are being undertaken in a specific landscape. And we will also shortly be launching a section on that profile to showcase the investments and actions that are the subject of an investment or impact claim by stakeholders in that landscape. So there will be two different ways to showcase activities or actions that are being undertaken within a landscape.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm going to jump to the next question. Please, can you give an approximate idea of costs of using the platform, the assessments, and making claims? So yeah, I mean, I can take this one. We have a cost for doing an assessment of $15,000 US dollars. I mean, that's for the baseline assessment, and that's for the validated by service. This gives access to the assessment team for 2 years, so it's possible to use the platform within that period of time and assess as many metrics as necessary. That's on the baseline assessment, and then on the claim costs. I mean, for now we are piloting it, so it doesn't have any costs. Yeah, Sophie mentioned we are trying to see what's the uptake and what's the use. So that's the current situation. Then we have another one. What is being validated when proving outcome? That indeed the activities contribute to the outcome, outputs. I don't know who can take this one.
I can take that one.
Thank you, Marie.
So what we decided to test in this pilot is to come up with a template of what we call a result chains. Others will call that a log frame. What it is a description of the links, the logic between the activities that are implemented and the outcome, the impact that these activities will have at landscape level. So we worked on a template that describes all the inputs leading to which output, leading to which outcome and impact And the idea is to link these activities with LandScale indicators and metrics, because that was, as it was mentioned during the presentation, a claim can only be made if there has been a LandScale assessment. So the claim will be linked to specific indicators and metrics, and that results chain will show the link between the activities and the expected effect on these indicators and metrics. And then there will be the monitoring plan focusing on the activity and then the repeated assessment focusing on the outcome level. So this is what we will monitor.
Thank you, Marie. I'll go to the next question. What happens when there is no formalized or organized landscape coordination process that allows, for example, to define whether an activity that a company or user will make a claim for is part of a valid landscape goal? Maybe Sophie, do you want to take this one?
Thanks for the question, Corinne. So we have quite a few requirements in our landscapes our claims validation mechanism around stakeholder engagement. So we require that the objective, scope, and plan for the activity were co-designed with its intended participants and beneficiaries, and that also stakeholders who could be negatively affected by an activity are consulted, and that there's the appropriate safeguarding in place. And we also require that there should be a goal in place at the landscape level for the indicators that an activity aims to contribute to, and that is agreed in coordination with stakeholders as well. We don't try to stipulate the sort of minimum requirements for a multi-stakeholder partnership in a landscape, because we recognize that they can take many different forms and they often mature over time. So we don't say no to, at least for the pilot, we're not saying no or putting in place a minimum in terms of the format of the multi-stakeholder collaboration, but instead focusing on where we think there is need for multi-stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, Sophie. Going to jump to the next question. What role can investment and impact claims regarding deforestation and reforestation on landscape level play in the EUDR requirements? Maybe Marie, do you want to take this one?
Yes, so I would argue it's not just the investment and impact claims that can play a role, but LandScale assessments as a whole, because in the assessment, we do have indicators and metrics focusing on conversion, so deforestation rates, the conversion of natural ecosystems, and also on restoration. So these assessments, the indicators within the assessments, will tell you how the landscape is doing on these two topics. Now, the UDR is above all about due diligence. So there is what's at stake here is for companies to trace their sourcing, their supply back to the exact sourcing area, and see how that sourcing area is doing. So in terms of conducting the due diligence itself, it's probably going to be very unlikely at the beginning that all the sourcing areas are covered by LandScale assessments. So for the company itself, I would not say that it will probably not be the best tool to do that. However, what will happen is that with the due diligence, there will also probably be a shift in the sourcing areas from high risk areas to lower risk areas. And this is where LandScale can be an interesting tool to explore for companies to try to identify landscapes in which the risk of deforestation or the level of conversion of natural ecosystems are lower. So this is how I see LandScale being used with this new EUDR regulation.
Thank you, Marie. Here by Marisa Balfour. Can LandScale only be applied to new projects, or is there a way to get started with the approach when activities of some kind are already in process? Marie, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So that's an excellent question. And the answer is yes, it's absolutely possible to apply LandScale to landscapes where activities have already been implemented for a while. And it's actually quite common, not to say the most common situation. So there is absolutely no problem doing so. The ideal scenario that was described in the presentation would be to do a LandScale assessment before the activities start as a baseline, and that would tell you how the landscape is doing, what are the main challenges, and that will really allow to target the activities to what is needed based on what the LandScale baseline assessment show. But in reality, that's the ideal world. In reality, activities are often already in progress, and it's not a problem to connect the assessment. And in these cases, because we've anticipated that in our claims policy, in these cases, the LandScale assessment that you will do, even if it's the first one, can potentially allow you to make an impact claim if you have another way to document the baseline condition of a given indicator, and that your LandScale assessment demonstrate that there has already been an impact of the ongoing activities compared to the baseline condition, then you can apply to make an impact claim.
Thank you, Marie. We have another question here. How is the LandScale team ensuring that local stakeholders take the central role in setting the landscape goals in the assessment, assuming a multi-stakeholder process doesn't exist yet? If multi-stakeholder processes exist already to set the shared goals, is it correct to assume that LandScale will adopt these shared goals instead of setting own goals?
I can take that one, Arturo. So as part of the process of conducting a LandScale assessment, we do provide guidance on how to engage stakeholders to set landscape goals and targets. And if a landscape initiative has chosen to do this, we would check this when we undertake the validation. However, we also recognize that landscape goals may have been already developed as part of the development of an action plan that could already be there before an assessment is conducted. And we would also accept that LandScale doesn't intervene or try to change the goals that are established by local stakeholders. And as part of the validation requirements for a claim, we would check the source of the landscape goals and an explanation of how local stakeholders have been engaged in the process of establishing those landscape goals.
Thank you, Sophie. We have another question by Leonie. So are you going to provide examples of this process and claims using environmental like forest protection and/or production indicators, level of productivity? I don't know. I mean, would you like to elaborate on this, Leonie? I will allow you to. Oh, sorry. I think I clicked here. So.
Hi, Arturo. Hi, Sophie, and everyone. Thanks a lot for giving the opportunity. It's very interesting the example that you put about the school. I'm just wondering if you could provide another example of this process with another metric like forest protection or productivity, or because I think these metrics are also something, these really land-based metrics are something that that our community is very interested in, and those are the metrics that we hear a lot. So I'm just wondering if you have examples that you can share.
Okay, thank you very much, Leonie, for clarifying your question. So right now we have not developed such example. However, we are conducting this pilot, and we really hope that this pilot will help us creating a bigger library of examples that we can share related to the different metrics. That's also one of the goals of this pilot project. So we are happy to hear that that would be helpful, and we really hope that that will be possible through the pilot. The good thing so far is that the range of activities from potential claimants seem to be really wide. So I'm confident that we will manage to do that.
Thank you, Marie. I think these are all the questions that we have for now. Maybe I will just give a minute or two to in case that we have any other question from the audience. In the meantime, I would like to mention that we have the relevant links here in the chat. So yeah, you can check out platform for the landscapes that can be eligible for participation, and then you have the website as well where you can fill out the form to apply.
Just to follow up on Marie's answer, we don't have any real examples yet, but if it would be helpful, I could provide a sort of theoretical example focusing on environmental indicators. So, for example, you could be looking at a claim around implementation of restoration of a riparian zone, and looking at that, how that contributes to improvement in different environmental indicators. So in this example, the inputs could be undertaking surveys and participating mapping to identify priority areas for restoration and seek free, prior and informed consent from key stakeholders. You'd obviously have the input of the trees themselves and seedlings for the restoration and the labor needed to plant and maintain that. And then in terms of the output, that would be the number of hectares within the riparian zone that has actually been planted. In terms of the local or activity level outcomes, that could be a decrease in the rate of soil erosion and increases in above or below ground carbon, or improvements in habitat connectivity. And then in terms of landscape level outcomes, you could see things like improvement in the water quality within the different water bodies that are influenced by that restoration of a riparian zone, and then the contribution that it makes to increasing coverage of natural ecosystems within the landscape as a whole, and the role that that would play in providing habitat for biodiversity. So that's a theoretical example, but as Marie says, we don't have any kind of real examples yet, and we're hoping to gain those through the pilot.
Thank you, Sophie. I think we don't have any other questions, so we might end the session a little bit sooner. But thank you very much for your participation, and please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any further questions. Yeah, hopefully you get to apply or get to communicate it to anyone interested.